Welcome to Lessons from the Clipboard. And today we're talking about opposite numbers. And so this is Minnesota Benchmark 7.3.5.2. And it says recognize opposite signs of numbers as indicating locations on opposite sides of zero on the number line. Recognize that the opposite of a number is the number itself, and that zero is its own opposite. And so the last part, let's address that first. Zero is its own opposite. What that means is zero is not positive and zero is not negative. As a matter of fact, when we look at the number line, and a lot of times we like putting zero right in the middle. And in this case, if we're going by ones, fives, tens, it doesn't matter. In this case, I'll go by fours. So this will be -4, -2, and 2. Okay. So here we have the negatives going to the left, positives to the right. So we could look at this. Okay. So if I look at the value of 2, the opposite of that is going to be the same distance from 0. And as soon as I start hearing things like that, but it's the same distance from 0 as -2. So the opposite of 2 is -2. Okay, well, when you see this number in front, that's not -2, that's actually -2. If we took something like 6 and then we put this symbol, what looks exactly the same, 6 minus 2, well then 6 minus 2, well then you're subtracting. But in this case, it's not is subtracting 2, it is -2. So the minus sign okay, and it looks just like a subtraction sign, means take the opposite. So if I want to recognize the opposite of -2, I take the opposite, which means I put a negative on top of it. So we could look at another example, the opposite of -3 is, and what do you think that is? Okay, well, the opposite of -3 means I have to take and make it negative of this. Well, if you said that, that is true, but now we have a negative of -3. Well, or the opposite of -3. Well, the opposite of a negative is a positive, so then this would be positive. You jumped right to the opposite of this is 3. Good job on that as well. Okay, so one of the other things it asks about is the opposite of the opposite. Okay, before we do that though, let's take a look. If I graphed -3, okay, so -3 is right here, which is 1, 2, 3 units away from 0. Okay, well, that means that its opposite has to be the same distance away from 0. So now I'm going to go 1, 2, 3 units from 0, and those two are opposite numbers. Okay, so a number and its opposite. So here's a little note. A number and its opposite add to 0. Okay, so a quick example, you could take -3 plus 3. Well, let's see here, -3 plus 3. So if I started at -3 and I go 1, 2, 3, that brings me back to 0. And then what did I use up here? I used 2. So 2 plus -2. So when I look at the number line, if I start at 2 and then I add negative 2. Well, let's see, negative 2 is this distance here. So I put that distance and I slap it on over here and it brings me back to 0. Okay. So now the opposite of the opposite of negative 88 is. Okay, so here in this case, I'm taking the opposite of the opposite. Okay, well, so the opposite, remember, that's like a negative, and this is like a negative. So the opposite of the opposite of negative 88. Well, a couple ways you can do that, but if you look at the opposite of the opposite, so I'm thinking about the opposite of the opposite. So if you took any number, actually we're going to work inside out. So the opposite of 88, well, the opposite of the opposite of 88 is going to be a positive 88. So we end up with a negative of a positive 88, which is simply negative 88. Okay, so think of it, if you had an exact opposite of u. So you have the opposite of u. Cover this up for a second. The opposite of 88 is a positive 88. Well, the opposite of the positive 88 is negative 88. I was starting to say, if you had someone that's the exact opposite of you, well, what's the opposite of them? Well, it goes back to you and who you are. Okay. So one of the things we're going to be looking at this year is absolute value. And absolute value is the distance a number is from 0. Okay, so 3 is 3 units from 0. Negative 88 is 88 units from 0. Okay, so that should be pretty easy. Now, how we look at that, we have these things called absolute value bars. So the absolute value of 3 is 3. And the absolute value of negative 88 is positive 88. So it doesn't matter if the number inside is positive or if it's negative. What's coming out is going to be a positive number. Where it gets a little more challenging is, let's look at 2 examples. So you have the absolute value of negative 3 plus 15. And we have the absolute value of negative 4 times 6. So in this case, what I need to do is I need to do all the operations inside. This is what I would call a grouping symbol. It groups and says, hey, do all this stuff because we have this operation of absolute value that needs to occur. So negative 3 plus 15. So negative 3 plus 15, then that's going to give us 12 because it's 3 less than 15 is what it comes down to. And then the absolute value of 12. Well, 12 is 12 units from 0, and so we get that it's 12. Well, over here, again, we have to do the same thing. We need to do the operation inside before we do anything else. So we have the absolute value of negative of 4 times 6 is 24. And if I were to look at a number line, I could see that negative 24, or I don't even need to see a number line, but negative 24 is 24 units from 0. So we're looking at distance. Distance is always positive. Well, I took a step backwards. Well, a step backwards is still a step. So if you're taking steps backwards on the number line, then that is still going to be positive in terms of distance. So hopefully that helps as we start to look at opposite numbers and begin to look at this concept of absolute value being the distance a number is from 0. And so in this case, we had to take the opposite of negative 24 because they're on the opposite sides, and we're just looking for a positive value. Where here, I'm not taking the opposite because distance is already positive. Thank you, and have a great day.